Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. I'm Tudor Dixon, and it is great to have you tuning in. Today, we are going to discuss a really tough subject with a dad who has been through the unimaginable pain of losing a child at the home of a neighbor whose father failed to secure his guns. Kristen and Mike Song lost their 15-year-old son, Ethan, in 2018, and today they're working on legislation they believe will save young lives. Together, both he and his wife created the Ethan Miller Song Foundation to honor Ethan's life and pursue safe storage legislation to protect other children from a similar tragedy. This may be a conversation that many of my listeners have strong and differing opinions about, but we think it's very important to have the dialogue. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. And let me start by saying I am so sorry for your loss. We talked a little bit about this before we started recording. As a mom, I can't imagine what you're going through. And I think it's so important for us to talk about this because many of the people who are listening have never been through this. And it is something that we all have to be aware of as parents. So thank you for agreeing to come on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for those kind words. And it is a devastating experience. And as every parent could, try to, imagine one day your child does not come home from a friend's house and its life is forever changed. But I appreciate being here and a chance to talk about this really important topic.
It's something that right now I think so many people are on one side or the other on so many of these issues. And I think you're probably one of those people that's like, hey, I'm just on the side of a dad who wants to, exactly what you said, see my child come home. If you can tell us a little bit about Ethan and just your experience and what led you to, based on your story, because I don't think a lot of people know your story. So if you can just explain what happened and what led you to come out and be a fighter, because we also talked about that. I mean, you could have made another choice to not talk about it, but you're out there every day.
Yeah, we had a really great. Ethan was a fantastic kid. I'm a sports person. I went fishing with him, hiking, biking, camping. We were really an outdoors type family, so we spent a lot of time together as a family of five. And we essentially tried to instill in him a lot of common sense about safety. And so a lot of folks say, well, you should have just talked to him about gun safety. I talked to my son quite a bit about it. I'm a musician and I was a big fan of the band Chicago. So I distinctly remember on 4 or 5 occasions telling all 3 of my kids, hey, listen, here's the story of how the guitar player in Chicago died. He was cleaning his gun. He was a gun expert. And he made a mistake, so you always have to check if there's a bullet in the chamber, stuff like that. And all my friends who own guns, I've always been 100% in favor of them having the right to do that. One day, Ethan had to get his braces off, and it was a half day at school. So he said, look, I'd love to just kind of stay at home and hang out a little bit and get my braces off. And then, going back to school doesn't make a lot of sense because there'll only be a half hour left. So my wife took him out to a lunch, and he was talking about his life. He wanted to join the military, wanted to have a big family, wanted to go to Rice University in Texas. And he said, look, I just want to go over to my friend's house and spend, an hour there. Can I go over there after lunch? And so he got his braces off. And it's kind of sad because he got his braces off. My wife sent me a photo, and that's the last photo it was taken of him. And so he goes over his friend's house, and there, unfortunately, and this is not, I think, indicative of most gun owners. There was unsecured guns in the front hall closet. The father had made it pretty obvious where the guns were in the house, and the child had been producing them and showing them to a variety of kids, both physically in the house and through social media for months. So there was a lot of people. Did you have any idea? No, we would have been really quick to say, let's have your friend come over here, but you're not going to go over there. And it was a total shock because this was a person who was a private detective, who certainly should have known about gun safety, lifelong NRA member. I know they teach gun safety. It's one of my points that I always try to make, that there's not a lot of disagreement on this. The NRA says if there's kids around, you should probably lock your guns down, separate the ammo. They have a whole class on it. So, but interestingly, they don't really support your legislation. They support doing it, but they don't want it to be mandated. But I will say that, I've been to a gun training in Michigan where when you come out of that gun training, they have the storage units right there, and they're saying this is the best thing to do. And so it is something that is top of mind for them. And it is something that would have stopped this from happening for you. And
what blows my mind is what you said about this guy being a private detective. I mean, he had a
Yeah.
security company. And so me as a mom, because I also said this before we started recording, as a mom, I don't have guns in the house. I am scared to death of my daughters going to someone's house that has unsecured guns like this. And I would feel safe if they had a security company. And this was somebody who probably also thought, well, I've talked about safety all the time, but it still happened.
Yeah, that was one thing that, lulled us into a sense of this was a responsible person. And Ethan was in the home for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and he was shot in the head. And, I always think of that scene from Saving Private Ryan where the military folks come to the front door and the mom knows this is bad news. That happened to my wife, and
Ugh.
that's just horrific to hear this in your wife's voice. Hey, they said we got to get to the hospital. She just texted me 911. I was nearby. We got down to the hospital, and when we got in there, I knew it was going to be a really life-changing moment because there was 10 or 15 law enforcement officers there. And when we walked in, you don't expect them to know who you are. You're like, wow, there's a lot of police here. And then all of a sudden you realize they're here because they all came down because we're going to have to tell some parents that their kid is dead. And we waited in this little room, a place where no parent ever wants to be, in this little room. And in comes the doctor, and he just says, we couldn't save your son. And we just fell off of our chairs into an abyss. You feel like you're falling off a cliff. You're spinning madly. You just feel your heart's getting ripped out of your body is what it feels like. And then, the doctor just said, hey, listen, you can't see him. And because my wife was adamant about going and seeing him, my wife Kristen, and nope. And I'll never forget it because he said in sort of a broken voice, it's just going to be too grotesque.
Oh.
You're like, this is my son. I just literally hugged him that morning. So from there, it was just, it was terrible. It was the worst thing you could ever experience as a parent. Even worse to see your wife, her expression, the sound in her voice, what it sounds like when a mom loses a child. It just doesn't sound like it just chills your soul. And so climbing out of this, I had to call my other two kids, tell them this news. My daughter dropped the phone. She was at college, dropped the phone, screamed for 15 minutes while I tried to, just soften 1% of the blow but you couldn't do that. It was just going to be hard. And then I had to call everyone else. I made these phone calls after phone calls until I just couldn't call another person. I just finally collapsed, and that was where this moment, my wife turned to me and she said, at least one positive thing has to come out of this, one thing. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And that's when we decided to try to save other kids and help other families out. And that's where we sort of got started with what's our mission going to be.
So you've been able to pass a law in Connecticut, but you get pushback. I mean, on this issue, there is pushback because there are people who believe that this is an infringement on your Second Amendment rights, that this is going to stop people from having the freedom that they want to have with their guns. And there are criticisms that from people on the other side saying it doesn't go far enough. So go through a little bit about what it's like to be fighting this when you have both sides kind of saying, no, no, no.
Yeah. The first thing that I did was I showed people pictures of Ethan. Like I put up it's unusual. Our approach was very unusual. We posted 100 pictures of Ethan. We just wanted everybody to see that he was a real human being that lived on the planet, very lovable kid, very interesting kid. We posted up video, and we wanted people to see this was a human being. And people started to go, they started to recognize him. So first and foremost, we're all human beings here, and I completely acknowledge and understand people's nervousness. Then my friends who are gun owners came to me and said, Mike, you got to come over to my house, because I'm going to show you my PIN code safe. Another friend had a biometric safe. Another friend who is the most conservative person that I know, Steve, great guy. I worked out with him at CrossFit for years. He said, I'm in favor of this, and I am the biggest Second Amendment's right person that you're ever going to meet. I've got like 15 guns in my house. And he said, but when I was a kid, I had this experience that I had it. I got hold of my father's gun, and I was playing cowboys, and I was on the kitchen table when they came down for breakfast, and I pointed a loaded gun at my father. Everyone ducked, and finally, he said, I came that close to killing my dad. And I thought, wow. He said, I'm in favor of this one law. So I always try to say this is, I think, the least polarizing law. And I'm a big tech person, a technology person, and I think technology changes things, and pin code safes open as fast as your smartphone. Biometric safes even faster. Maybe there's a win-win here where we can get a tax credit for gun owners for beefing up their ability to store their guns safely, and maybe we could put a law in place for those folks who are going to be sort of like this dad who just going to turn a blind eye. And like you said earlier, you don't know where your kids are 24/7. That's why I said to
Mm-hmm.
Senator Cruz when I met with him, with my wife, we said, listen, you're a dad, I'm a dad. I'm just talking dad to dad. I just think, you just don't know where your kids are 24/7, and there's more and more guns out there. So the probability is growing that they'll be in a home where someone could
And
access a gun.
just to be clear, what happened to your son, this was an accident. This wasn't that the other boy was purposely trying to hurt him.
Yes, it was. We believe it was a completely unintentional accident. What's not widely known is that the coroner, the news reported that Ethan shot himself, and unfortunately, that doesn't appear to be true based upon, what we were told. But we never made a big deal about that. It's not really the point. But just in case people are saying, well, your son, came in and grabbed this gun. No, this gun was put in his hand multiple times. It's quite likely that he did not shoot himself, and it's not really a big deal to me either way. But if that father had taken, 10 seconds to lock up his guns, and I would recommend a gun safe versus, lock and key, because keys are just, you have to keep track of them. It's so much easier to have a pin code safe. It's so common these days. That could save your child's life. So I always try to say dad to dad, and the funny thing is, 85, 90% of the gun owners that I know maybe about 20, they're like, it's a no-brainer. I'm going to lock
What
my
about the
guns up.
people that say no? What do you say to them?
Well, the first thing I always do is open a gun safe in front of them, biometric, and then pin, and I just say that's really the inconvenience there, and I'll buy you the
And you
safe.
do this on your website, right? So people can see this, because I think I've seen videos of you opening it, and I mean, it literally is just sticking your finger on it, and there it is.
That's if you see me and I look a little angry on a video or social media, and you will.
I mean, you have a little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
I know, and I'm sorry if I get a little worked up, but that would have saved my kid's life,
Right.
And it's really a great, as I say, I think it's a win-win. We can look at the technology and go, let's get a gun safe, and that's where we want to start the conversation with Republican legislators. We want to say, let's start with a tax credit, get some gun safes out there. If we say 75 million bucks, we spend trillions of dollars, on everything. If we just put out there a tax credit and just a law that says, look, you got little kids in your home, we can agree on what that age is going to be, under 16, under 17, and let's take the guns out of their reach, because kids do make mistakes. And
why isn't it a bigger conversation? I mean, why? If you, like I said, I was at a gun training, and there was an NRA connected person there, and at the end of the gun training is, here are your safes. But they're not inexpensive. So if you are in Detroit and you're a woman buying a gun, you may be putting all of your money into that. So why isn't there some opportunity for, if the NRA supports this, some of these groups support it, why isn't there like hey, with your membership, you could get this, or, people coming together? Is there something in the works for that, so that it becomes less of a barrier and more? I mean, I get the tax credit, but that's something that you're really seeing at the end of the year. Is there something that could be done to do something ahead of time? Because there will be critics who will say this law will only come in after somebody has already died.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, great ideas in there, Tudor. First of all, we do a gun safe giveaway. We offer to buy back guns for people who just have guns stored in their home they're never going to use, and kids running around. And we get the most amazing stories on that. And what happens is a lot of people bring a gun in because a parent has dementia, grandparent has dementia. They find unsecured guns in the home. They're like, let's just bring them in. We'll get you $50 for the gun. And, it's our way of sort of just taking it out of direct circulation. And it takes it right from a very dangerous situation into a very safe situation. The safe giveaway, though, is I'm even more excited about, because we have the best conversations with gun owners. They come in, they just have to show their card, the card that shows that they're licensed or whatever they have, and then which we don't record, by the way, and then they get a free gun safe. And we've been doing that for 4 years now, and it's incredibly popular. It's a great idea. Some of the manufacturers like Dick's Sporting Goods even are giving those safes at cost. So it's a really great, hey, let's unite around this issue type of an event. So there are some things being done, and the Connecticut model is one of the first in the nation where we did it statewide. And I think that's a great statewide initiative, bipartisan statewide initiative. Let's work with law enforcement to bring the guns in, but more importantly, get the safes out. And I think that's less controversial to get the safes out there. So there's just a lot we could do to work together to make sure that a higher and higher percentage of the 400 million guns in the country, or whatever that number is, are secured, especially the ones with kids in the home.
Would your law say that everyone has to have their gun secured, or are you saying if there are children in the home, then it has to be secured?
Ethan's law was primarily for, when there's kids in the home, guns should be secured. And but the laws can continue on beyond that, where they say, look, if you have a gun, it should be secured. From my perspective, I think that I'd rather start with just homes with children in them with unsecured guns, because I think that's the biggest area of need. It's my personal, thing to say most states in the country don't have any law, but states like Texas and Florida, even some red states, and New Mexico just put a law out there saying, yeah, kids in the home, lock guns down. That's been my message from day one. Kids around, lock guns down. If a state wants to go further than that, they can. But I think that secured weapons are safe weapons. I mean, that's something that I get from all my military friends. They're all trained in safe storage. So I think that's really important. And the law can kick in prior to a tragedy happening. I think it's a great comment people sometimes make is, well, you're waiting for a tragedy to happen and then the law kicks in. That's kind of how most laws work. You break the law and then, people become aware of that there were unsecured guns there. But there is like a penalty of, I think it's $500. And if a law enforcement officer walks in the home and sees an unsecured gun, kids close by, maybe it's a domestic abuse type situation, but this gun is right near some kids, they can basically say, hey, look, we're going to charge you with this penalty because you've got little kids, unsecured guns, and it's a really dangerous mix.
What about the people that say, well, this is a slippery slope. If you have to register your gun, then you're going to have people doing like random gun checks at your house and coming in and saying, you can no longer have a gun. I think there's a fear that once you have a law like this in place, then it goes a little bit further.
The slippery slope argument, for me is I understand it. There's incrementalism in anything in life, but on the flip side of it, we've got over 40,000 people dying each year from gun deaths. This is a great, I think, opportunity for bipartisanship, which is what happened in Connecticut. Interestingly, it became a very bipartisan issue. And I think that it's a lot like, I would say, smoke detectors in your house. We don't have door-to-door people going incrementally looking farther and farther into your house for your smoke detectors to be not installed correctly. They just say, look, by code, if this house burns to the ground and 5 people die in your house and you were like, no need for smoke detectors, that's not a big issue, then I think you would be liable for that. And that's the kind of penalty it would be. But the incrementalism to say they're going to be going through our stuff, it's one of the few laws, I think, that's not polarizing, because essentially what we're saying is securing your weapons helps you hold on to them. It also helps when there's a burglary, that a weapon is secured in any way.
To your point, there is that week where it's changed the batteries in your fire detector, right? And you see that everywhere. You see commercials. It's like a whole education campaign, and that's to save lives, that you're constantly, there's billboards on the street. Make sure you change the batteries in your fire alarm or your fire detector in the house. So will there be some sort of education campaign on this as well? Even if you don't pass these laws in states, I think there are a lot of people that just don't even understand what's available out there or the dangers or know the numbers. I talked to one of our Republican legislators here in the state of Michigan, and he said, we have a few kids die every year like this in the state of Michigan. How many children die across the country because there was a gun that wasn't secured?
Yeah, and that's it's a great question to ask. And I think directly, if you look at the direct numbers, a kid probably dies every day in America due to an unsecured gun by an accident like Ethan's accident. But far more concerning are the kids that die from a suicide, because when you put a gun into the mix and a suicidal kid, that's really scary because I think it flips the odds that they're really going to die. So if kids try to kill themselves through many other means, they take too many sleeping pills or something like that. There's a very high percentage rate that those kids get rescued. Not that that isn't a very scary thing, but
No,
with a gun,
yeah.
it's one and done with a gun. It's just over. It's over so fast. And teen suicide is such a problem because it's episodic. Kids can have their worst couple weeks of school. They don't want to tell their parents about it because they've been humiliated by someone at school. And there's two things that sometimes happen when that happens. The kid goes to school with a gun, and 76% of the time they're taking their family's gun in. This was done under the great research done under the Trump in the Trump years. They said how many of these school shootings are happening with a family gun when there's a teenager involved. It's 76% of the time they're getting that gun from home because it wasn't secured. And so I think that's a great. So there's four things that really occur. There's the accidental, unintentional type deaths, you could say. There's the suicides, which are huge. There's the school shootings, which we see every day. Wouldn't we all just like to see that news not on the front page of not on the lead story on the news? And the third one that's kind of interesting too is the guns are stolen at an astonishing rate in this country. I think 200,000 guns are stolen each year. 200,000. So over a period of a decade, that's 2 million guns. And that's a direct transfer from a law-abiding citizen's home to a criminal's hand. I mean, it's direct. That's fueling a lot of, I think, violence that happens out there. So those are four things that safe storage addresses kind of at a root cause. I love the idea of reinforcing our schools, but sometimes if we just made it harder for the kid to get the gun at home, maybe they wouldn't kill themselves or go to school and terrorize and kill people there. And that would make, I think, the world a better place.
So what kind of education campaign can be done? Because like I said, as a mom who is living in a house that doesn't have guns, I think too often I can be lulled into, well, it's not at my house, And so oftentimes I also think that the people who are in that situation, there are people in that situation who I believe can be very staunch defenders of the Second Amendment, not having lived that experience. And maybe this comes up for a vote or their legislator has to vote on it. And they're not so active because they go, well, it's not going to happen in my house. It's not my problem. I'm not going to get involved. But that could have been you. I mean, you could be in that same situation. I mean, it wasn't your house. So what do you say to those parents who are saying, I don't know enough about this, so I'm not going to get involved because the drama is too great on either side? And how do you educate them?
Well, you're asking a fantastic question. I think the challenge of doing this is I'm just a realist. And I know that it's awkward for people to say, hey, do you have any guns in your house? And you're really sloppy about the way you secure these guns. Like, are you one of those people who has a loaded gun on your nightstand? In reality, that's a difficult question for people to ask. In theory, it's exactly what we should ask as parents. So what I often encourage people to do is say, hey, listen, my kids are super curious. They've seen lots of movies where people are shooting guns and lots of video games where people are shooting guns. And I just always try to ask, hey, listen, are the guns secured? Because, we know that our kids are curious, and all kids are curious. I try to always lead with that because it's honestly a great thing to do, and it's less like, hey, I think you're not securing these guns in your house.
Right, because you would think that you could really offend someone by saying, oh, you want to have a play date with my kid? Let's go through your safety procedures before my kids are allowed to come to your house. And but I do want to say that. I just want to know how to say it.
Yeah, and so I always recommend saying, look, my kid's very curious, and if you have anything that's unsecured, I would recommend, like I'd always recommend, just making sure you keep an eye on them, and that if you have guns or things like that, if they're secured. I think it's also great to try to find out what they're interested. If you happen to know they're into hunting, and you happen to know they're into skeet shooting or just going to the range, hey, strike up a conversation around that, and then say, hey, just out of curiosity, I know some kid named Ethan got killed recently. I always say, use my son. Just say there was a kid named Ethan. He was just a curious kid, and sometimes tragedies can happen when guns aren't secured. I think it's a great thing for parents to do, just to get it out in the open. And if you are a gun owner, here's an even better thing. If you're a gun owner and you secure your guns, it's great to let people know that too. Hey, we've got guns in the house. You know what? But they're secured. We've got them locked up tight. The kids don't have the PIN code safe number, so your kids are safe playing here. I think we can all start the discussion together. We can all work together to reduce those gun deaths.
But how do you get that message out to parents that that's even a conversation that you should have? Because like I said, the parents who don't live this and don't have guns in their house and don't think about the fact that their kids go to another house that could have an unsecured gun, what kind of education campaign could go out there to say, hey, this happened. There's this law we're talking about. This is why we think it's important for you, even though you may think it doesn't touch your life.
Yeah, we are actually working on an educational campaign or educational sort of syllabus, basically, that will take kids very quickly through, gun safety 101 for kids. So at the kid level, we're trying to show them how dangerous this can be and hit them with it a few times as they go through K through 12, right? So they can start to really see how serious this is. So the first thing we think is that there should be some type of education. It doesn't have to be a huge number of hours they go through, but I think it should also be repeated. So, you
So
go
would
through
you see that as something that could be in schools?
Oh yeah, I think we'd love to partner, with this bill. We think I like the three things that would be great to have in, this bill would be money to roll this out with education for all the states, some type of incentive for people to buy a gun safe, and then a penalty. I do think you need a stick to go with the carrot, some type of penalty like Ethan's law that says, listen, if a kid is killed in your house and you left your gun on the nightstand for, day after day after day, and you had five kids who are 8 years old in your house and you didn't secure that weapon, yeah, you could pay a penalty, because I think you do need a deterrent for those folks who think that's a really good thing to do. And was troubling when we talked to some legislators. They were like, oh, I purposefully leave my loaded gun on my nightstand. And, and I just said, do your kids ever have nightmares coming to your room? Or,
And we've seen people post pictures of it, though. We've seen people on social media say, this is what my bedroom looks like. I've seen that. And then there's that knowledge that those guns are just there and they are open to the public. And in some cases, those are folks that have kids. So having run for office and seen what it's like, there is pressure, certainly, on one side to say you want all the laws, on the other side to say you don't want the laws. And, either way, this becomes a political issue. For you, it's not a political issue. And I think that, again, I just think that if there were a way to get this out on the airwaves in a bigger way, to say, this is how easy it is to have this on your nightstand. But then I've also had people, because I've had this conversation with folks and knowing that you were going to come on the podcast, try to talk to people about it. And they say, well, how do you prevent people from saying, well, this is very racist because you don't live in a neighborhood where you have to grab a gun on this edge of your nightstand every night. But you might have people in an inner city that absolutely have to have that gun. But also I would kind of argue, well, we also see an uptick in kids that get guns and have mistakes in those areas as well. So what do you say to the people who say this isn't fair to certain communities?
Yeah, I always just go back to the idea that the new technology, you can open it at the speed of a smartphone. And I think that is a win-win. So first of all, like, I open a lot of safes on TV because I think and what part of that educational campaign for adults would just be show how easy it is to open a gun safe. I don't know that that's common knowledge. I still get a lot of people going,
no,
I didn't quite realize they were that easy. And, I know what it's like to fumble for a key, and those old combination locks that I had up in my attic, I had all my papers up there and jewelry, and you're like, oh, 3 to the left. That's all gone. It's like tick, tick, boom, it's open, So I think that's really important. But yeah, I would just say that it's so easy for a kid to grab a gun, and a kid's natural instinct, just from watching, and you could blame it a little bit on the media too. It's so many shows start off with someone just pointing a gun and pulling the trigger, that when particularly little boys grab a gun, you see it a lot in boys are a higher percentage rate of these problems. They have a natural instinct to point it and pull that trigger.
And I think that no matter how much, I've had friends that say, well, we don't even let them have Nerf guns. I think there are people who have lulled themselves into a false sense of security that my child knows guns are bad and not to get near it. But that can still always happen to you. It's like, kids it's their natural instinct to pick up a baby doll and rock it. It's their natural instinct to pick up a gun and fire it. Those are just things that you innately know you can do. And that temptation is there.
It really is. And this is something that I've said to legislators who really push back very, very hard on this and say, I'm happy that my 12-year-old kid, and there is a legislator in Texas who said, yeah, I got 12-year-old kids in the house. I keep these guns right here, and they're loaded. They're right here. Anyone can grab them, but they won't do that because I told them not to. And I always tell them, hey, look, after we spar and we go and we knock head to head, I was just say, hey, listen, just as a dad, I realize that this is your issue and you're dug in here, but man, just honestly, I would get a gun safe and not have your loaded gun on your nightstand. I just as a father to a father, I'm not like, hey, I lost the argument, but maybe privately, if I were to tell you, just you don't want to be in this position. It's horrible. It's horrible to lose a child, have his head literally, blown off his body. That's what happened to my kid, and it's breaks my heart every day. But can you imagine if I had left that gun there myself, how I would feel? Oh my gosh, I would be it would be, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I could go on if I had put that gun into my kid's hand by just leaving it out, So there's only one group of parents that, like we always say, nobody wants to be us, Tudor. Nobody wants to be the parent that's lost a child at a young age of 15. There's one group of people that would envy us, and that would be folks who sort of set up the circumstances where their own child, shot a sibling, shot, another person, or killed themselves by suicide because they thought, oh, I told them not to touch that gun, and then they did. So I'm not trying to,
think about your situation of the man who owns the security company. I mean, that's what you do for a living. You have to, it's at some point feel like I've had this conversation. My kids know better. And I think that's another thing, to be honest, just today, I think we are giving kids way too much credit because we believe that kids understand consequence, but we know the science behind that is that they really don't understand consequences until they are in their 20s. And so as many times as you've had this conversation with your child, how many other conversations have you had with your kids that they just go out and they do it anyway? And you're like, we've already talked about this. You knew you were going to get hurt, but you did this anyway. This prevents that from even starting. And I just think that it's something that people on both sides really need to think about because it can happen to anyone.
I just really appreciate you saying that because it's hard to understand that, when a kid's 15, their brain isn't really fully formed and structured. You're absolutely right. And then you get, I guess what they call it, executive function. You start to just make better decisions. And that's why parents, I'm a big believer in parental control of your household. A parent is in charge of your kids. The kid's not in charge of the house. The parent's in charge of the house. Like all of those discipline, focusing like a laser beam on your kids, making sure that they walk the walk. They don't just say, yeah, I'll do it. Those are really critically important. But if you've got a 15-year-old child and you think they're perfect, I always try to say, I know that Dick Cheney was a smart guy. He made it to vice president of the United States. He was a strategic person, obviously very brilliant, and even, I'm sure, a very safety conscious person with his guns. And sure, he was a lifelong member of the NRA. He still managed to make a mistake that led to someone being shot in his proximity. And I'm not saying that like Dick Cheney is a horrible human being. What I'm saying is, even adults make this kind of mistake with guns. So why would we expect a 12 or 13-year-old kid to be perfect? I just think that is dangerous, and I would encourage parents not to view your kids that way. I make mistakes. We all make mistakes, and kids make mistakes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. Honestly, I actually saw one of your videos on social media, and it was a moment for me where I went, I don't know what the girls' friends' houses are like. I don't know what they're doing when it comes to their guns. And man, this is a different way for me to view it. And I just felt like I really need to talk about this. And I'm so grateful that you are so willing to come out. Both you and your wife, Mike and Kristen Song, you can look them up, and tell us where to look up the organization so people can see, because I just think it's so impressive that you are willing to go out and talk about this so openly and make sure parents know.
Oh, thank you. It's been so wonderful spending time with you. It's songstrong.org/map. You can see a video of me opening a safe there. And the map is that we looked at all 50 states in the country just to see what they'd done for this. And Texas and Florida have modest gun storage laws in place, so it's not necessarily a blue versus red thing. I think there's room in the middle here where we can get something going, but it would be amazing if we could pass a law nationally, because that would take a lot of the chaos of having different laws in all different states be so different. If we've got some of the red states on board already, maybe we can find some place in the middle we can meet and pass one simple law so that we can really go out and publicize it, like you said, and let every parent know this is a good question to ask. Kids know this is a dangerous thing to do, and gun owners know, hey, this is not too big of a push in terms of getting a gun safe. And if anything, it'll keep your gun with you longer when there's a criminal that comes into your home trying to steal it. It's at least creating another barrier for that to happen, and that's a good thing for everyone.
Well, it's been very interesting. I'm so glad that you were here to share. I'm sure our listeners got a lot out of this. And like I said, or like you said, I believe that there is a place where people can come together. We've seen it, people coming across the aisle. We've seen it in Michigan. We've seen it in other states. Like you said, we've seen it in red states. It shouldn't be a political issue. It is about our kids. And so I'm always passionate about kids, having four myself, and I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. As always, for this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com. You can subscribe right there, or check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us the next time on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. Thank you.